I had a Dogman sighting in 2010. I was working in an ambulance at the time with a partner, and only recently did my partner divulge his side of the story to me. It was initially a Reddit post I created years ago, but with the addition of my partner's information, I've rewrote it into something that is easier to read for an audience. Since you were nice enough to ask me to share it with you, I'm giving it to you here. After the sighting, I became obsessed on trying to figure out what it was we saw where my ambulance partner wanted nothing to do with it. And he would completely shut the topic down anytime I tried to bring it up. Until about a week ago, when I finally got him to cave and tell me what he saw that night. I've only shared this story a couple of times, and it's unique, at least I think it is, in that it takes place in Connecticut. Not exactly Dogman Central. I hope this sighting serves you well. The first part will be my point of view, and the original post edited with some details that I had left out. Hopefully it reads less like a Reddit post and more like something you can share on YouTube. My work partner that night refused to acknowledge or talk about the event for almost 9 years. The second part will be from his point of view. I'm a former paramedic who plays EMT on weekends now. I always thought if I were to experience something paranormal at work, it'd be in one of the number of ambulances that I've used on account of all the souls that have passed through. My partner and I this night weren't that lucky. I used to work in a moderately sized city in central Connecticut, and our company covered surrounding towns and had contracts to over inter-hospital transfers and things like that, much further away from our 911 coverage area. The city itself has only a couple of 100,000 people, with suburbs and a river valley, and then woods beyond. Nothing special at all. We had to respond to the fringe of our coverage area in another town in another corner of the state, literally nicknamed the Quiet Corner, because it was so low populated and heavily wooded. After almost getting there, we wound up being canceled by a closer unit en route. It was 4:30 a.m. on a Wednesday in the autumn of 2010. Where we ended up turning around was in a notoriously small, one-light town. The ride back to civilization from where we were was only a 20 to 30 minute trip, but it's a long, straight, two-lane state route with dim lights and thick forest on both sides, with occasional residents and very few businesses. We turned off State Route 44 and onto a road named Pumpkin Hill Road, which, after a couple more turns onto side streets, was going to drop us off further down 44 in the direction we needed to be going. Surrounding us was state forest and a couple of dirt roads and a couple of small rivers, a small lake, and not an awful lot of houses. The houses that are there are spaced pretty well apart, too. I was riding in the passenger seat, with my face in a laptop, writing our cancel tag and mentally preparing to go home after a long night, and my partner asked, "Do you see that?" and began to slow down. Pumpkin Hill was a gravel road that's fairly narrow, and we had a jet black forest on both sides of us. Visibly in front of us was clear, but to the sides you couldn't see past the 5 or 6 foot tall hedgerows that lined the road behind the guardrail. The cab was illuminated by the laptop, so I shut it and looked up, squinted a little, and there I saw it, only 100 feet away from us or so, right in front of us. A very, very large dog, with silver gray fur and straight cropped ears, with little tufts atop of them, walking away from us, ever so slowly with a very unusual gait, almost like it was limping. This damn thing had to be 4, maybe 4.5 feet tall at the shoulders. My partner slows to a crawl, thinking it's hurt, and maybe it has a tag or collar. We thought surely such a magnificent beast had to have had an owner. As we slowed to a crawl, something happened that I will never unsee or ever forget, and it's the day I started believing that not all things are what they seem. The idle of the ambulance wasn't at its usual roar, since we were just creeping at about 5 miles per hour and gaining. I was on the passenger side, and it was on my side of the road. The plan was for my partner to put flashers on and for me to whistle or hoot to see if our new friend was acclimated to humans and needed any help, or if he was street tough and to let him be on his way. We closed the 100-foot gap to around 25 to 30 feet. As we closed our distance, and right at the 10-yard mark or so, my partner and I simultaneously got a sense of dread. I was suddenly very aware of how much shit I was in, and my blood turned cold. The hair on my arms and neck stood on end. My vision narrowed, and my heart started pumping well over 120 beats per minute. And then this dog stood up. He just stood up. Not like a domestic dog, or a bear, or even a domestic cat would. Their movements are kind of awkward when they stand, and they're usually pretty quick to go back on all fours after a couple of steps. We do have black bears here, but this definitely was not a black bear. It was just too big to be a bear. This creature was meant to stand up, and it did it as fluidly as you or I would. My view of this thing was from behind, and this creature's shoulders would have put an NFL defensive ends to shame. It was a massive animal. My partner stopped the truck. The beast cocked its head to the side ever so slightly to the left, revealing a single yellow-green glowing eyeshine, then turned to my side, which was the right side of the woods, and bolted. It was over as soon as it started. What my partner and I have always called the werewolf. We estimated him to be around 7.5 feet tall. Our ambulance has a little over 13-foot clearance, and the tufts of his ears lined up with about where our emergency lights were on the front of the truck. The top of its head ended about where the windshield ended. Its shoulders were easily twice as wide as a man's, maybe 4.5 to 5 feet. Its back muscles were well developed, and it had a tapered waist, which led down to a bushy 3 or 4 foot long tail, and I kept referring to it as a he because it had enormous testicles. How it walked around without dragging those things around the ground, I have no idea. Its quadriceps, if I had to guess, were the size of a man's waist, anywhere between 34 and 40 inches. Its legs bent backwards like a canine's, and I used bent backwards in quotes. I would make out an Achilles heel and a massive clawed foot, and it appeared to be placing its weight on its toes. The upper body's details were more alarming to take in. The ears were cropped like a Doberman's. They stood straight up, and the tufts atop of them were a few inches tall of their own. When it snapped its head to the side to acknowledge us, it laid its ears flat back on the top of its head. He was all business when he did that. I got a perfect profile of its face, and it had rigid, straight cheekbones, which led away from its face and towards a gigantic muzzle. The socket around its eyes looked incredibly human, and the eye itself was probably the size of a racquetball, and it wasn't reflecting light from our scene, or headlights. It was either a vibrant yellow-green or seemed self-illuminated. The muzzle had to be a foot long, and it had a big old shiny, or maybe wet, dog nose at the end of it. Its mouth was partially opened when it turned its head, and then it looked like it swallowed. I only caught a short glimpse of its mouth. Its gums were black, and it had a dark, maybe purple tongue. Its teeth were bright white, and it had 2 pairs of fangs. They weren't incisors or insides of its mouth. It had a pair of fangs that sat at the front and outside of its mouth, and at the front and bottom of its mouth. With his mouth closed, you could still see them. And these were teeth designed for puncturing, ripping, and tearing. Off of its incredible shoulders were its arms, which were jacked and almost twice as long as its legs. The claws of the werewolf ended around where his knee was, and its claws had to be 5 or 6 inches long. The claws were attached to digits at the end of a hand and did not look anything like a paw. Its forearms were longer than what was as humerus would be, and made up the majority of the arm itself. Above the elbow were its biceps, which if I had to guess were somewhere around 40 inches around and well defined. Just absolutely massive. I've always wondered what would happen to a dogman if you fed it nothing but whey protein and elk and made it go to the gym 8 hours a day. Watching this thing stand so fluidly made sense looking back, as it was obviously used the power of its legs and did this sort of push-up with its gigantic long arms to spring into that position. The thing that has always bothered me, though, is that little head tilt he did. I got the sense of dread before he stood up, like my mind and body knew something bad was about to happen, but it didn't know what. It was almost telepathic, but not really, if that makes any sense at all. I just got this feeling from the werewolf, like, I know you mean well, but move on, because I was never here. Then it vanished. The expression on its face wasn't angry or a scowl. It was more of a look of indifferent annoyance, like it was saying, "Ah man, who the hell are you? I have to deal with this now?" When it rolled to the right, it bent its legs, and then just leapt straight up and over the hedgerows and guardrails. It didn't do a run or start to squat or anything like that. He just turned and jumped, and when he did, he kept his body elongated. So from a standing position, it went at least 6 or 7 feet in the air, and far enough in back of and over the bush to not be easily seen anymore. Another easy 10 or 15 feet, at least. After that, my partner punched it, and we drove fairly recklessly to get off the gravel road and back to the one with at least streetlights. I would have never asked him to slow down. We both wanted to get the hell out of there, and we fled with a sense of urgency. I've seen many canines stand on their hind legs. I've never seen a hellhound leap with precision over a guardrail and brush that messed with my head other than that night. After a lot of research, I came upon the legend of the Michigan Dogman and the Beast of Bray Road. The only problem is, I live in Connecticut, and we're not known for our Bigfoot sightings or even wacky cryptozoological stories. The town of Pomfret, Connecticut, which was close by to the town where we were, does have some interesting wolf lore and a park named Wolf Den State Park. The short version of the story is that General Israel Putnam, who was a Revolutionary War hero, killed the last wolf in Connecticut in a wolf den, I think around 1764, before the conflict. The story, as I recall, wolves in Connecticut were hell on livestock, and the settlers had killed the last of the she-wolf's cubs and her mate. So the story goes, she started slaughtering livestock and stalking and attacking people. Not to eat, but just to kill. One morning, she massacred over 70 sheep, and Israel Putnam was tasked with putting her down. He tracked her to her den and did so. The wolf den is actually still there to this day. There have been dogman sightings close by in Massachusetts, and even legitimate gray wolf sightings. In the last decade or so, wolves have been finding their way down New England from Canada. I don't know what I believe in, and it's certainly not werewolves, but I totally saw something that really looked like a werewolf, just that one time. This is where my original post ended. 9 years later, the second half of the story comes to you. My partner and I had worked together in that ambulance for 3 years at the time of the sighting. We knew each other pretty well, and as alarming as the events were that transpired in front of us, there was something off about my partner, who we'll just refer to as Bob, for weeks after the sighting. The ride back to operations, we could just not believe what we had just seen and exchanged things like, "What the hell was that?" And "I don't know, I saw the same thing you did," and "Did that really just happen? I can't believe that just happened." After we fueled our truck and punched out, the next time I saw him was a Thursday night for our last tour of the week before our 3 days off. When I showed up, he notified me that he'd called dispatch and requested to be posted in downtown the entire night, not wanting to leave the confines of the inner city. It wasn't an unusual or odd request. Some people prefer the busier assignments, and we definitely did. But it started to become a habit with Bob, and as weeks and even months went by, we were never sent out into the suburbia area for the call after dark the rest of our 5 years together. I thought I was just as shaken up as he was, but something was sitting sideways with the way he was acting, and every time I approached him to talk about it, he would immediately dismiss the topic and be stoic and quiet, or change the subject entirely, leaving an odd vibe I've never felt around my work brother before. Absolutely nothing changed about our job performance or our friendship, but after a while, I suspected my partner had either seen something like this before, or had seen something that I hadn't the night of the sighting. After years of patiently prodding him and asking him what was wrong, he finally disclosed what was bothering him so much about our sighting, and it turned out it was the latter. 9 years later, I have his permission to relay his point of view to you. Our ambulance was a 2008 AVE box truck. It had a 13-foot clearance, and even though there's a 7-inch difference between our heights, When seated in the cab, sitting up and facing forward, the tops of our heads were probably somewhere around the 7.5 to 8 foot mark off of the deck. As a passenger, you can't see an awful lot out of the mirrors, but as the driver, you can see down the side of the truck and pretty well behind you. There was also a mobile data terminal that controlled several functions, including lights, sirens, scene lights, dispatch response, and a 4-screen camera that showed a backup camera which was mounted on top of the back, pointing down at a 90-degree angle, 2 side cameras which covered the outside ends of the ambulance, and a patient compartment camera which was the only one that recorded inside and only when a patient was in it. When you were in the driver's seat, you had pretty much a 360-degree coverage. As a passenger, the most you could see out of the side mirrors was jack shit, especially since my partner was an ice giant and fought over the mirror angles with me all the time. Like I said, he's 7 inches taller than me. As relayed to me by him, Bob said that when he completely stopped, he was looking at the werewolf in front of us, but had a pit in his stomach, convincing him that he wasn't actually looking at us when he turned its head. My eyes were fixated in front of us on Wolfman number 1. Bob, though, trusting his instincts, and which I did not notice him doing because I was busy trying not to piss myself, already had the MDT angled right at him and started cycling through the cameras and turned the side and rear scene lights on. The scene lights aren't the emergency lights. And scene lights are these bright white or blue hued LED lights that are so bright you could probably land a space shuttle from orbit with them. When he did that, he noticed that our friend in front of us was in fact not alone. He caught a glimpse of 2 of them behind us, and one coming up on my side of the ambulance. The 2 behind us he described as Coyote Tan and on all 4s, standing in what was our blind spot. The way the camera in back is angled, he said all he could see were the tops of their heads, the tops of their torsos, their arms and shoulders, and their massive paw hands. He described them exactly as the first one was, except with the color variation. When he turned the scene lights on, they bolted to the right side of the road, out of view of the camera. This is where it gets a little creepier. After watching their shadow and movements going to the right towards the tree line and brush, Bob cycled the MDT monitor to the starboard side, hoping to catch them and see if they were going to advance towards us or run into the brush. Mind you, this is all happening quickly and in matters of seconds. When he cycled the camera, what he saw was yet another Dogman, this one on its hind legs and blacker than the blackest of blacks. So massive it was filling the entire monitor, and with its left hand was trying to open the door to the patient compartment area. Ron had hit the scene lights and cycled the camera and lost sight of the 2 Coyote Tan Dogmen. As he couldn't see too much from the camera view, he looked in the passenger side mirror and said when he did, the black Dogman looked right back at him with its yellow eyes and actually grinned at him. He did see the Coyote Tan Dogman again as they leapt over the brush behind the grinning one. And he told me, if you rolled your window down and reached your arm out, you could have shook hands with that thing. That's how close he was. When he told me this, almost a decade after the incident, my blood ran cold again. He didn't discuss it for years, and all this time I had no idea one was less than 5 feet behind my right shoulder. He said the grinning Dogman was a sinister-looking son of a bitch. He was clearly trying to stealthily open the patient compartment door to the right side of the bus. Luckily, the locks engage when the vehicle is in motion. When it was staring at him in the mirror, with its toothy grin, it moved its head and saw the Dogman we initially spotted jump up and over the brush, and then followed suit. My partner said it stopped grinning and almost looked like it was having a chuckle with itself. Honestly, he looked like an asshole. It turned to the right and jumped up and over the guardrail with the rest of his pack. As we drove away, I rolled my window down, and we did hear a very loud sound, almost like a chirping or a yapping. It was more like the sounds that hyenas make. When I did that, though, my partner yelled at me, "Roll that back up! What the hell is the matter with you?" And then we sped away, and it was over. The whole event couldn't have lasted more than 1.5 minutes from when we first spotted him 100 feet down that dark road. But now, knowing my partner's side of the story after all these years, what bothers me the most is where did the other three come from? And what was their plan? What if it was someone alone in a Prius or a Mini Cooper or something? They'd be wolf crap by now. Were they out on the prowl just looking to ambush motorists or screw with people? They were so intelligent to move into blind spots and had a distraction in front of us like a classic ambush. After having thought about it, I settled my nerves over the years now, and I have so many more questions I'm afraid I'll never have the answers to. But that's our encounter with what we swear happened the night we saw a wolf beast on Pumpkin Hill Road in a sleepy little corner of Connecticut in our ambulance.